You're lying in bed, it's 2 a.m. Everyone else on planet Earth is asleep. And you're rerunning a conversation from 6 years ago, replaying the exact moment you said you too when the waiter told you to enjoy your meal, frame by frame, in excruciating HD, not because anything bad happened, not because anyone's mad at you, just because your brain apparently has a subscription to a streaming service that only plays your most mildly embarrassing moments on loop forever with no cancel button. Welcome to your head. Let's talk about what's actually going on in there. Here's the thing, you're not alone in this theater. There are people right now, all over the world, mentally replaying conversations with the same obsessive detail you bring to it, reconstructing the exact tone of voice someone used, wondering if sounds good in a text meant actually sounds good, or I'm quietly furious, and this is the last time we speak. You've probably replayed a 4-minute conversation for 4 hours. You've probably rehearsed things you're going to say in an argument that hasn't happened yet and may never happen. You've probably apologized, internally, to someone who doesn't even remember the interaction. And the wildest part? You're usually the harshest character in your own replay. Everyone else in the memory gets a fair edit. You're watching yourself in slow motion, cringing at every word choice like you're a film critic who exclusively hates your own movies. Here's where it gets interesting. What you're doing has a clinical name, post-event processing. It's a well-documented psychological phenomenon where the brain, after a social interaction, enters a kind of internal review mode, replaying, analyzing, and evaluating what just happened. Originally, researchers identified this pattern most strongly in people with social anxiety. But here's what the more recent data shows. Almost everyone does it. The difference is in frequency, intensity, and crucially, what conclusion your brain tends to land on at the end of the replay. The brain does this for a reason. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for social reasoning, doesn't actually finish processing a complex interaction the moment it ends. It keeps working, running simulations, checking for inconsistencies, looking for signals it might have missed in real time. This is your brain doing its job. The problem is it sometimes does its job the way that one coworker does their job. Technically, but with way too much energy and absolutely no sense of when to stop. But this is the part nobody talks about. The replay isn't random. Your brain isn't just pulling up any memory. It has a very specific selection algorithm, and it's biased in a way that's almost unfair to you. The negativity bias means your brain prioritizes storing and replaying negative or uncertain social experiences over positive ones. You could have 10 conversations in a day. 9 go perfectly. One ends on a slightly ambiguous note, a pause that lasted a beat too long, a reply that felt a little flat, and guess which one gets the prime time slot in tonight's mental replay marathon? Exactly. Positive interactions get filed away quickly. Uncertain or negative ones get flagged, tagged, and placed in a mental folder labeled Review, urgently and repeatedly until further notice. It's not anxiety, it's not overthinking for the sake of it. It's your brain's filing system, and it was designed for a world that no longer exists. And this changes everything about how you understand yourself. Psychologists call this the Zeigarnik effect, the brain's tendency to obsessively return to unfinished or unresolved things far more than completed ones. It was first observed in the 1920s, when a Russian psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik noticed that waiters had perfect memory for unpaid orders, and almost no memory for orders that had already been settled. The brain treats unresolved social interactions the same way. If a conversation ended cleanly, both people understood each other, no ambiguity, emotional closure, your brain files it and moves on. Done. Paid. Next. But if there was any unresolved tension, any moment where you're not sure how you landed, any interaction where you said something and didn't get clear feedback on how it was received, your brain keeps that tab open, keeps refreshing it, keeps trying to complete it. The late night replay isn't irrational. It's your brain trying to close a loop it doesn't have enough information to close. You're not overthinking. You're running a process that genuinely cannot finish because you don't have the data it needs, which, honestly, is a much kinder way to look at it. And here's what that actually says about you. Because this is the part that tends to get missed. People who replay conversations aren't weak. They're not broken. They're not too sensitive or too in their head. They are, almost without exception, people who care deeply about how they affect others. You replay conversations because other people matter to you, because you're not the kind of person who walks through the world indifferent to how your words land. You're not lying awake wondering if you got hurt. You're lying awake wondering if they did. That's not a flaw. That's empathy with the volume turned up past comfortable. The people who never replay conversations, they often don't have a great track record of noticing when they've hurt someone. They sleep fine. They also sometimes leave a quiet trail of people who felt unseen by them and could never quite explain why. You're not that person, and some part of you knows it, even if the 2 a.m. replay sessions don't always feel like a compliment. Here's where science makes this genuinely fascinating. Research from the default mode network, a set of brain regions that activate when you're not focused on a task, shows that this network is most active during exactly this kind of social rumination: mind wandering, self-referential thought, replaying past events. For a long time, scientists thought the default mode network was basically the brain idling, background noise. But newer studies show it's actually doing some of the most sophisticated processing the brain is capable of: social reasoning, moral evaluation, perspective taking, predicting future social outcomes based on past behavior. Your late night replay sessions, that's your default mode network running high-level social simulations. It's modeling other people's mental states, trying to predict future outcomes, building a more accurate map of your social world. In other words, your brain does its deepest social thinking after the conversation, not during it, which explains why you always think of the perfect thing to say about 3 hours too late. That's not a failure. That's just when your best processor comes online. But here's the part that goes deeper, and I want you to stay with this one. For some people, the replaying isn't just about that conversation. It's about something older, something that formed long before the recent awkward exchange or the text that went unread. A lot of chronic mental replayers grew up in environments where reading the room wasn't optional. It was necessary, where you learned early that the emotional temperature of the people around you had direct consequences for your safety, your comfort, your sense of being okay. When you grow up hypervigilant, constantly scanning for shifts in tone, trying to decode what someone's silence means, learning to analyze facial expressions the way other kids learn to read, you develop an extraordinary capacity for social perception. But that capacity doesn't turn off when the environment gets safer. It keeps running, it keeps analyzing, it keeps replaying, because your nervous system never got the memo that the threat level changed. Not everyone watching this has this story, but some of you just felt seen in a way that's a little uncomfortable, and that discomfort is worth paying attention to. Here's where it gets interesting, because there's a reframe here that's not just feel-good noise. It's actually supported by the research. Most people who replay conversations assume the content of their replays is accurate, that they're remembering what happened the way it happened, that their internal post-game analysis is getting them closer to the truth. It's not. Studies on memory reconsolidation show that every time you replay a memory, you're not just watching it, you're rewriting it. Slightly. Each replay is a reconstruction, not a playback. And each reconstruction is colored by your current emotional state, your current self-perception, your current anxiety level. This means the version of the conversation you're torturing yourself with at 2 a.m. isn't even the real conversation anymore. It's a remix, a version that's been run through your fear filter so many times it barely resembles the source material. The awkward pause you keep replaying probably lasted 1.5 seconds. The version in your head has been running for 45 minutes. You are not remembering what happened. You are creating what you're afraid happened, and those are very different things. The brain that replays every conversation is the same brain that remembers everyone's birthdays, that notices when a friend seems off before they've said a word, that chooses words carefully because it understands words have weight. It's a costly gift. It comes with sleepless nights and internal monologues that run like an unmoderated comment section. It costs you rest. It costs you presence sometimes, being physically in a room while mentally still in a conversation that ended 3 days ago. But it also makes you someone who shows up for people in ways they can't always articulate, someone who catches what others miss, someone whose attention, when you give it, is the real thing. The replay is the shadow side of that. You can't have the depth without the echo. The goal isn't to stop caring. The goal is to learn, slowly, imperfectly, that the loop can be acknowledged without being believed. You heard the replay. You don't have to take it as testimony. If your brain does this, if you're a replayer, an overthinker, someone who feels things on a slight delay and processes them at 2 a.m., there's a specific reason your nervous system got wired this way. And it has everything to do with something that happened long before that conversation you keep rewinding. That video is right here, and if this one made something click, the next one is going to go even deeper.